The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to St. Matthew. This is how the birth of Jesus Christ came about. When his mother Mary was betrothed to Joseph, but before they lived together, she was found to be with child through the power of the Holy Spirit. Joseph, her husband, since he was a righteous man, yet unwilling to expose her to shame, decided to divorce her quietly. Such was his intention when, behold, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said to him, "Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary, your wife, into your home. For it is through the Holy Spirit that this child has been conceived in her. She will bear a son, and you are to name him Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins." All of this took place to fulfill what the Lord had said through the prophet. "The virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall name him Emmanuel," which means God is with us. When Joseph awoke, he did as the angel of the Lord had commanded him, and he took Mary into his home. The Gospel of the Lord. A pretty dramatic gospel episode, yes? Sure is. If you understand all of those details, then you got a rare insight into the mystery that we proclaim week in, week out. Welcome, all of the Signers, and Fontanas, and Nelsons, and having your Christmas gathering. And a special part of the Christmas gathering this year, Katie was engaged, Pat Scannell's daughter, engaged into this large family to one of the great Fontanas. Where's Frankie? Chicago. Okay, good. Congratulations. You're getting into a very large family, Katie. Know them all through the years. You all are welcome. This week, I was asked, why don't we have a twofer? You know what a twofer is? A 2-for-1. Like a kind of a Christmas special. Why come to Mass today and come back again on Tuesday or Wednesday? Why not one Mass to cover both days? It's possible some folks are having a twofer. A twofer. An interesting thought. It's the same question that comes up quite often when I have a Saturday evening wedding and people come up and say, does this count? Does this count? Even if there's not a Mass at the wedding, I've had people come up to me and say, does this count? Count for what? I mean, how do you manage those numbers? What is the agenda? A twofer? Does it count? But the answer is no, God doesn't do twofers. That's okay for Walmart and Steinmart and all the other marts. Hey, they do that and they like to manipulate and say, we'll give you 2 for 1. But hey, they've jacked up the price already, most likely, so it's really not 2 for 1, it's maybe 2 for 1 1/4 or whatever. But it's a way of getting us to believe we're getting a shortcut, right? And that's what the question is about, a twofer. God doesn't really work with twofers. Because the very question itself betrays the truth in me. I want a shortcut, I want the abbreviated version, and I want to be on my way. And that's a lot of reality about church if we're going to be really honest with our own selves. Like the man who said to me, I just want the wafer, and then I'll be on my way. What an interesting perspective. Is it possible? Of course it's possible. After all the years, that's what it's about. It's certainly a sad commentary on us. But it's a reality. There's no short version to this story. The whole mystery that we celebrate. There's no short or abbreviated version. It's long. The whole history of Israel. It's long and it's extensive and it's very challenging to be a disciple of Jesus Christ in the modern world. It's really challenging. It takes a great effort on people's part. Not just a simple, small change, but a radical change. That now things become, how is he directing me? How is he guiding and leading me? Talked about it last week, remember? Do you come with expectation when you come to Eucharist? Or are you marking time or stamping a card? Do I have a hope and expectation that the Lord would really speak to me? But I have a much more helpful question in regard to Mass. It's a much more clarifying question, and the question is this: how often do I personally choose to pick up an extra Mass? How often do I choose to come to a daily Mass freely, without obligation or responsibility, so that I could be in communion with Him and in communion with His people? That's a much more helpful question. Do I believe in Eucharist? How does it live and show itself and manifest itself in my life? I asked you a question last week. You remember? I really asked you 3 questions, so I'll tell you about the one. The one question at the beginning, you remember, it was, if you or I could do something to change the world and make it better, what one thing would you do? One thing. And I asked you to reflect on it as we come to the Christmas celebration. What one thing would you do? Only one thing. Would you change yourself? Or would you use that opportunity to try and change others or the world or the global experience? It's interesting. 3 different people said to me during the week, I would use it to help others. I would address the issue of homelessness or hunger. Pretty neat. Good ideas. But today I'd like to narrow the scope and say, if you could really do one thing for yourself, what would it be? During this Christmas season, and that's what I would like to reflect on today. What one thing would I do for myself? I told you last week about John the Baptist being in prison and behind bars and having a kind of a little faith crisis. Sending messengers to him to say, are you the one? Or should we look for another? I mean, thousands of people around the world have looked for another. It's the most common reality in the Christian world. We've looked elsewhere. And people settle for so much less than the reality. Over and over and over again. It's not unusual for people to have a faith crisis. In fact, it's a great thing when people have a faith crisis. Because if I don't have a faith crisis, then I've never really come into an adult growth, developed faith. What I have is simply a kind of a praxis of faith, where everything I know and everything I say and everything I do, I believe. There's no need for a God in such a reality. If I have all of this figured, there's no need for faith. Faith is when I really make a decision to trust in the face of multiple issues and challenges. It's one of the greatest opportunities for growth in the spiritual life, when I go through a little crisis of faith. Are you there? God, are you there? Why are you not doing something? It's a great thing. A faith that has never been challenged or tested is really not a faith. It's just a self-belief. I mentioned to you that John the Baptist, and we like him, are also in prison. And we have similar questions from our imprisonment, but the irony of it is, our prison is self-made. We live in a self-made prison. There are no bars, as Pablo de Ors, that great teacher, says. Strictly speaking, it's not a jail. But remember what he said, and I quoted it to you last week. We begin to ask ourselves, why have I lived locked in a jail with no bars? And we go to its door and we walk out. And he says, meditation is that moment when we exit. He's writing about the importance of meditation and reflection, allowing ourselves to really be in God. And he's saying without meditation, life becomes absolutely chaotic. Yes. Things get totally out of proportion. And my way and the manner of doing things becomes critical. He says, we discover that the door has never been closed, that it is we who have closed it with a double turn of the key. That door, he says, is not really a door. We invented it. And we hemmed ourselves in because of our prejudices and our misunderstandings and our beliefs and disbeliefs. It's quite a prison. And John is in prison, and perhaps having a little faith crisis, he sends messengers to ask Jesus, are you the one? Or should we be looking for another? It's a great question in clarifying who he is that has come into our world. And we do much the same in life. We send out messengers to ask or to tell. But our questions are usually a little bit different. Our questions are more like, did you hear about so-and-so? Let me tell you what I heard. Can you believe that? It's kind of a regular parlance, everyday parlance. What a scandal, we say. Or we say, did you hear they're getting a divorce? Can you believe it? Them, of all people? Wow. Scandalous. I would never have thought that. Or, did you hear they left the church? Can you believe that? And they were all up in it, all up in everything, and now they up and left the church. Can you believe it? Scandalous. Or did you hear the scandal about her? Let me tell you. Or did you hear the scandal about him? I just can't believe it. I can't get my head around it. And the question is, did somebody ask you to get your head around it? Or is it just one of those questions that comes out of your little prison? My small cell. It's a good question. What a terrible prison. A small cell. What a need to be in control. What a need to know it all. and then either give my stamp of approval or my denial. Wow, that's a prison. Such a prison is pretty bad. It really looks more like a stable than a prison. Isn't that interesting? A prison or a stable, they're pretty bad places. A stable stinks with the feces of animals and creatures, and it's just a bad place. A kind of a prison without bars. But many people enjoy getting caught up in the stable, or the stables or scandals of others. It seems they just can't help themselves. They have a penchant for all of the juicy pieces. It's a phenomenon in life. And it's not really that they can't help themselves, it's just that they don't help themselves or won't help themselves or won't allow Him to help them either. And maybe more so it is a reality that it keeps me from looking at my own stinky stable. So long as I can project outwardly and look at all the others, I don't have to look at my own self-made prison. That's why there's no twofers. There really isn't. Because there's no shortcut as life would have us believe. And there is no shortcut in the Christian life experience. Our good friend Father Balzer was laid to rest this week. What a great man. What a great person. What a great legacy. What a great blessing that he has gone to his reward. There was a scandal that surrounded his final days. How very sad. I tried to visit him most weeks since I've been back from Ireland. I wasn't successful every week, but I caught him most weeks, and what a great experience it was sitting with him, learning from him. I want to thank you, all of you who showed up at his funeral. It was a great showing from the community of St. Paul. And it reminded me of a great truth. Good people find good things in all circumstances. Remember the couplet I gave you last week? Two men looked out from prison bars. One saw mud, the other saw stars. It makes all the difference in the world. When I look out from my own prison cell, what do I choose to see? Mud, stars. Makes the life difference. It's a life-changing difference. What do you see? Let me tell you about the greatest scandal of all. You want to hear it? You don't? Come on, tell me you want to hear it? Because I'm going to tell you anyway, right? Greatest scandal of all. Matthew, our reliable, faithful friend, a Jew, a great follower of Jesus and Jesus' experience in life, coming from all the rich history of the Old Testament. He tells us about it. This is how the birth of Jesus Christ came about. Mary is found to be pregnant, and her fiancé Joseph knows he is not the father. It's a scandalous situation. It appears that way. Our modern world would reflect rather easily. Either she was raped or had illicit relations with somebody else. How else could it be? I'm sure there was many the shake of a head when that message passed around. I'm sure there was a lot of chatter in the town. I can't believe it. This is how the Messiah is to be birthed? What an interesting story. I'm sure there was a great deal of recrimination. But Matthew, our brother, does not tarry with the details of the sordid story, thank God. But he wants to let us know that our God came into the world in the midst of a perceived scandal. Why would God do such a thing? Why would God do that? Could it be because he wants us to get ready for the scandalous God in the flesh? The scandalous God in the flesh, Jesus Christ. Perhaps he was just confounding us in our righteousness, that we know it all. Jesus, born in the midst of scandal, would continue to scandalize throughout his life. This is why he died the death of a common criminal. He scandalized. He died the death of a common criminal, the very worst way one could die in our world. That's a scandal. As we take a closer look at him, and the infant who grew from the crib, he challenged the prevailing understanding of law, he breaking bread with sinners, touching lepers, calling tax collectors to follow him, forgiving a woman caught in adultery, and making claims that sounded blasphemous to the religious leadership. That's why he died. How interesting. Scandalous. 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 So what does it all mean? Could it mean, perhaps, an answer to the question that I asked at the beginning? What one thing would you do to make the world a better place? Would you allow him to be born in your stable? You know, that place where I store all of the stuff that's stinky, that I dislike, and perhaps others dislike as well. That is stinky and unresolved, and just lives there? Would I allow him to be born in my stable, in my self-made prison? That would make a huge difference in the world.